Meet Sammy Spark. Early mornings are a fact of life for her, but not for her brother Tom. While he sleeps on, she's got a lot to do, and it's all related to her breathing. It's something she has a major problem with, and it's not just asthma. But before we can understand what causes Sammy's illness, we need to check what we know about the process of breathing and the bodily equipment that makes it possible. From the outside of the body, breathing is a pretty hidden process. So what's inside? First, the ribs, the cage of bones that makes up our chest. They move in time with our breathing. Inside the ribs, our lungs and the airways leading to them. At this scale, they look like two sacs, filling and emptying as we breathe. We'll see later that they're much more complicated than that. So, where's all this movement coming from? Is it the lungs inflating that push the ribs up and down? Most people think it is, but they're wrong. It's the other way round. The movement of the ribs increases the volume of the chest. Result, the air in the lungs is at a lower pressure than the air outside. Air rushes down the pipe, the trachea, from the mouth, filling the lungs. And breathing out, even simpler. The muscles attached to the ribs relax, the weight of the rib cage forces air out of the lungs. So is that all there is to it? Not quite. You may have noticed that you can breathe and your ribs hardly move. How come? Something else must be changing the volume of the chest. Another muscle. This time, one you need to see. The diaphragm. As we breathe, it contracts and relaxes. Maybe you can spot how the contraction also increases the volume of the chest. We breathe in, relaxation of the diaphragm, we breathe out. So that's our basic breathing equipment. Time to get back to Sammy. She's up and dressed, doing exercises to help her breathe more easily. It's hard work. But if she's got the same basic equipment for breathing as the rest of us, why does she need the exercises? There must be more to breathing than we've seen so far. Time to take a look inside. This is a bronchoscopy. Images from a fiber optic camera inside the air passages. Here we're in the trachea, and this is where it divides, one tube leading to each lung. These tubes, the bronchi, continue to divide into smaller and smaller passages in each lung. Perfectly normal. But if we were able to see inside Sammy, things would look very different. Her tubes are clogged with a sticky fluid, mucus, which makes it hard for the air to flow freely. But how do the exercises help Sammy to breathe?
In the mornings, I do my first physio, and this consists of me sitting up and doing breathing exercises and percussion on my chest. I do the breathing exercises to remove the mucus that settles in my lungs, and it makes it hard for me to breathe. I cough, which actually moves it from my chest, and it helps me and it's easier to breathe.
It's easy to understand that air passages blocked with mucus are a problem for Sammy, but there's more to it than that. Breathing isn't only moving air into and out of the lungs. The most important part of breathing is what happens to air when it gets into the lungs. Back to the bronchoscopy. Every breath that we find so easy and Sammy finds so hard moves air through these passages. We've seen that the air passages divide, and they keep on dividing, smaller and smaller. Each lung is made up of a huge network of tiny air passages. And the secret of what the lungs are for lies in the tiny air sacs at the end of each minute tube. The air sacs are called alveoli. But what are they for? Just looking at them gives you a clue. They're surrounded by a network of blood vessels. That's why we breathe, to get oxygen from the air into our blood. Let's move inside an alveolus and take a close look at a single air sac and a single blood vessel. The air we breathe in is only 20% oxygen. The rest, nitrogen and other gases, is not much use to us, so we'll forget it. When we breathe in, there's more oxygen in the alveolus than in the blood vessels, so what happens next? It's called diffusion. Gases always move from areas of high concentration to low concentration. Oxygen molecules dissolve across the thin membrane of the alveolus into the blood vessels. This oxygenated blood returns to the heart and is pumped around the body to the tissues that need it. So each time we breathe in, some of the oxygen is extracted from the air. But is this the only difference between the air we breathe in and that we breathe out? No. When you burn any fuel with oxygen, you get waste products. Blood arriving in the lungs has a lot of carbon dioxide in it, but the air inside the alveoli has hardly any. High concentration, low concentration. Carbon dioxide moves in the opposite direction from the blood to the air inside the alveoli. Breathing out removes the carbon dioxide and the whole cycle can repeat. Clever, isn't it? Two jobs happening in opposite directions at the same time. Oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. An exchange of a gas our bodies need for a waste product that must be removed. But the mucus in Sammy's lungs gets in the way of this process of gas exchange. So throughout the day she has to perform her breathing exercises and give herself physiotherapy.
My physiotherapy is extremely important. It's important that I do it 3 times a day, every day. In the afternoon I do physio in a completely different way. Instead of sitting up and doing my breathing exercises, I lie over a cushion, and this helps the mucus in my lungs to drain to the top of my lungs instead of laying at the bottom. When I was a little girl, my mum and dad helped me with my physiotherapy because I couldn't do it myself. But now I'm older, I can do most of my physiotherapy, nearly all of my physiotherapy, by myself, which gives me much more independence.
But all we know so far is that Sammy has a problem with mucus that blocks up her breathing. We don't know where the mucus comes from or why. Time to learn a bit more about Sammy's condition. She suffers from a disease called cystic fibrosis.
I have cystic fibrosis, but I also lead a very normal life. I go to school, but I often miss chunks at a time. This is because of my situation, being ill a lot. I can't do PE at school because the activities I do on my own, I can take my own time to do. But at school I'd have to keep up with the other pupils and I couldn't do that.
Sammy copes with her CF, but she can't get rid of it. CF is a genetic disease. All the instructions for our physical makeup are determined by the DNA in each cell of our body. But sometimes small changes in our genetic material can cause big effects in the way our body functions. And that's the case with Sammy and her cystic fibrosis. Many of the organs of the body are lined with a special type of cell called epithelial cells. The intestines and the lungs are probably the most important. In cystic fibrosis, the DNA of these epithelial cells is different from normal. We've already seen that Sammy's CF affects her breathing. Now it's time to find out why. The alveoli in all our lungs are lined with epithelial cells. They normally secrete a liquid which stops the alveoli from collapsing. It's a complicated process, but an important role is played by particular protein molecules in the cell membrane. And this is the difference in Sammy's lungs. Because of a tiny difference in her DNA, these protein molecules are also different. They don't work properly. Her epithelial cells secrete a much thicker liquid than they should, the mucus that Sammy spends so much time trying to move. It clogs up her lungs, interfering with breathing, and also traps bacteria, making her more likely to get infections. And all of this means that Sammy spends quite a lot of time in hospital.
I have a good relationship with 2 hospitals, and I have to because I'm in there so often. I have regular appointments, mainly to see how well I'm doing, to check up on my weight, but generally how I'm feeling. And when I have an infection that's too hard to deal with medicines that I take at home every day.
And weight-wise?
Weight-wise, I'm doing well. I lost a bit of weight when I was ill, but I've put it on again now.
I mean, when we look at the growth chart here, you've done brilliantly. You had really been static for almost 2 years, and then over that next 18 months you did brilliantly, and pretty much right back up to the 3rd percentile now. Are you the smallest in your class?
Yes, but I'm not the smallest in my year, I think.
Excellent.
Okay.
Sammy's doctor, Wilf Kelsall, keeps a constant check on Sammy's weight and height. Because CF affects other organs of the body, particularly the intestines, it's a good estimate of how well Sammy is doing. But at the moment, like other genetic diseases, there isn't a cure for cystic fibrosis. Sammy's doctor can't cure CF, but he can treat the symptoms. But to treat the symptoms, you have to know what they are. Dr. Kelsall uses a peak flow meter to measure how fast Sammy can expel the air from her lungs. It's a quick measure of how badly blocked up her lungs are. If there's a lot of mucus in there, the doctor will also order an X-ray. Normally our lungs show up as dark areas with a clear view of the ribs. When Sammy's lungs are very congested, the mucus will show up as a white cloud. But the amount of mucus in her lungs isn't the only threat to her health. Many of the problems of CF are caused by what lives in that sticky glue, bacteria. At last, something the doctor can treat. But to kill bacteria, you've got to choose the right drugs.
Grown there, much bigger X-ray. I think we probably should send you off now to get a sputum.
Okay.
So we can send it off to get it cultured to see what's growing.
A sample of Sammy's mucus is sent to the microbiology lab. The aim is to grow enough of the bacteria from Sammy's lungs to test which drugs are effective against them. But there are many bacteria in the air, even in a hospital lab. It's important that they don't contaminate the sample, so care has to be taken to maintain sterile procedures at all times. Sammy's mucus is spread on a plate of nutrient and incubated in an oven overnight. With the oven around human body temperature and plenty of food from the nutrient on the plate, any bacteria will rapidly divide and grow. Next morning, you can see that colonies of bacteria have grown on the plate. But there may be many different types. Bacteria susceptible to one drug may be immune to another. Now it's time to find out what types of bacteria are present and which drugs will be effective. Samples of the original culture are spread evenly on a new set of plates.
Okay.
Pads soaked in different antibiotics are placed on each plate, and the new plates are returned to the oven. Antibiotics are chemicals which kill bacteria. By next morning, the microbiologist can see which ones are effective against the bacteria in Sammy's sample. There are clear areas around some of the antibiotic pads, but not others. What does that tell you? That the antibiotics on those pads have killed the bacteria. That's what Sammy's doctor is after. Now he knows which antibiotics to prescribe. Sammy suffers from many different bacterial infections. That means many different antibiotics. A whole fridge full. And she has to know about all of them as she administers them herself. We're used to taking antibiotics as pills, but how can Sammy get drugs to the bacteria if they're inside her lungs? This is one answer, a nebulizer. The antibiotic is in solution. The pump produces a fine spray of droplets like a mist, which Sammy breathes in straight into her lungs, directly towards any bacteria lurking in the mucus. But can't Sammy take anything that can destroy the mucus itself?
This year I've started taking a new drug called pulmazine or DNase. It's really good because it helps the mucus in my lungs liquefy, so it's easier for me to cough it up.
Sammy inhales the new drug through a nebulizer. Again, tiny droplets of the drug are drawn deep into her lungs. But this drug is quite different. Unlike an antibiotic which kills bacteria, this drug is an enzyme which chops up long molecules. The mucus in Sammy's lungs contains a lot of DNA molecules left over from her own lung cells that have died and dead bacteria. These long fibers of DNA are what makes the mucus so sticky and hard to shift. As the droplets of drug dissolve in the mucus, the DNase enzyme chops up the DNA into shorter segments. Shorter segments of DNA, more slippery mucus. And that means it's much easier for Sammy to shift with physiotherapy.
Well, it's great to see you all. Do you have a nice holiday?
Yes, lovely.
Because cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease, it's important that the whole family understands it. But what is a genetic disease? Why does Sammy have it, but her parents and her brother Tom don't?
I mean, as you well know, cystic fibrosis is one of the commonest inherited diseases now. With modern technology, we understand the illness. We understand that in the street, 1 in 20 people is carrying the gene for cystic fibrosis.
To understand how CF is inherited, we have to talk about genes, small sections of DNA which code for particular characteristics. We have 2 copies of any gene, one from each parent. Both of Sammy's parents have 2 genes for the epithelial cell protein we saw earlier. But only one is the faulty cystic fibrosis gene. That means they don't have CF. They are carriers of the disease. When a child inherits a faulty gene from the mother and another faulty gene from the father, only the faulty protein can be produced. Like Sammy, that child will have CF. But you could inherit a faulty gene from your father and a healthy gene from your mother. It's all a matter of chance. One healthy gene, one faulty gene, no CF. And you get the same result the other way around. Healthy gene from the father, faulty gene from the mother, another carrier. Because it's all chance, there's another possibility, a healthy gene from each parent. In that case, no CF and not a carrier either. Each of these 4 possibilities is the result of a chance combination, like tossing a coin. For parents who are carriers, there's a 1 in 4 chance any child will have CF, a 2 in 4 or 50-50 chance they'll be carriers, and another 1 in 4 chance they'll be free. But remember, we're talking averages here. A couple might have 3 children, all with CF, or none at all. Sammy's parents are carriers of CF, and Sammy is a sufferer. But what about her brother, Tom? He doesn't have CF, but is he a carrier? The answer is, we don't know, and neither does he. It is possible to test to see if he's a carrier, but it's a very sensitive issue. Would you want to know? Knowledge about CF has increased enormously. Sufferers are living longer and longer. But there still isn't a cure. Until a few years ago, it was science fiction. Then, the actual segment of DNA making up the CF gene was identified. Now tests are going on to achieve the seemingly impossible, inserting a healthy copy of the gene into the lung cells affected by CF. In the meantime, Sammy and other CF sufferers will continue to cope with the challenge of cystic fibrosis.
People probably sometimes think I'm strange at school, and I don't really know how to tell them why I can't do exercise or go out to their house and sleep for the night. But people get used to it, and my best friends, nearly all of them understand about CF now. But it's just something you have to live with, and it gets easier and easier.
Meet Sammy Spark. Early mornings are a fact of life for her, but not for her brother Tom. While he sleeps on, she's got a lot to do, and it's all related to her breathing. It's something she has a major problem with, and it's not just asthma. But before we can understand what causes Sammy's illness, we need to check what we know about the process of breathing and the bodily equipment that makes it possible. From the outside of the body, breathing is a pretty hidden process. So what's inside? First, the ribs, the cage of bones that makes up our chest. They move in time with our breathing. Inside the ribs, our lungs and the airways leading to them. At this scale, they look like 2 sacs, filling and emptying as we breathe. We'll see later out of the lungs. So is that all there is to it? Not quite. You may have noticed that you can breathe and your ribs hardly move. How come? Something else must be changing the volume of the chest, another muscle. This time, one you need to see, the diaphragm. As we breathe, it contracts and relaxes. Maybe you can spot how the contraction also increases the volume of the chest. We breathe in, relaxation of the diaphragm, we breathe out. So that's our basic breathing equipment. Time to get back to data that they're much more complicated than that. So where's all this movement coming from? Is it the lungs inflating that push the ribs up and down? Most people think it is, but they're wrong. It's the other way round. The movement of the ribs increases the volume of the chest. Result, the air in the lungs is at a lower pressure than the air outside. Air rushes down the pipe, the trachea, from the mouth, filling the lungs. And breathing out, even simpler. The muscles attached to the ribs relax, the weight of the rib cage forces air.